for being here. My name is Ila Schuprutin, and I am what we call the Information Integrity Lead at the Communicating with Disaster Affected Communities Network, or CDAC. And I'm really pleased to be joined here today, both in person and online, by a smart, tough, and diverse row of thinkers and doers. On my left is Christina Ville from Insecurity Insight. She's the director and founding member of that organization and specializes in monitoring open source and social media to identify events that affect aid security and threats to the humanitarian space. Online, we have Maria Frey. She's a senior media leader and member of the management board of Sudan, Ukraine. I hope I said that kind of okay. It's the Ukrainian public broadcaster, and she's passionate about building community dialogue. We also have with us Alasdair Stewart. He's the senior advisor and senior researcher at the BBC Media Action. That's the BBC's international development organization, where he leads on the organization's work tackling misinformation and disinformation. We also have with us Wala Mohammed. She's a Sudanese independent researcher and digital rights activist. She's the founder of Hopes and Actions Foundation, which is focused on tackling online gender-based violence, hate speech, as a driver of conflict in Sudan. And then last but definitely not least, we have Amal, who maps social media networks and their strategies.
Good afternoon, everybody who's joined us online as well. Recording in progress.
Who's that? Alex, our tech guru, can you tell us who was that? From another room. It's from another room. Okay, let's ignore that. So Amal Khan, he maps social media networks and their strategies. He has this concept of seeders and spreaders, and he founded Valent after realizing that the scale of the problem of inauthentic social media accounts to detect, predict, and respond to them is just massive. The scale of social media accounts is massive, we need to have better measures of detecting, predicting, and responding to these inauthentic accounts. So I'll let them introduce themselves and their work more thoroughly, but before we get into it, let's quickly check the pulse of the audience here in the room with a Slido. Alex, if you could pull that up. I don't know if you've all used Slido before, but it's a quick way of responding to some basic questions, just to see how we all understand the problem of disinformation. All right, Alex is still pulling that up. So maybe I'll just introduce our talk today by mentioning very quickly an anecdote from about a month ago when, with my team, I was in Kenya talking to Sudanese emergency response room volunteers. One of them said that the war online in Sudan is worse than the one on the ground. And I don't want to undermine the scale of the violence and atrocities that are happening in Sudan on the ground, but it's really telling that someone felt that the war online was somehow more pernicious, more harmful, or more memorable or noticeable than the violence that was happening in real life. And in war and conflict, disinformation is often the first weapon to be deployed. Constant exposure to disinformation leaves us confused, uncertain about who or what to believe or trust, and uncertainty leads to hesitation and inaction, and compels us to stand aloof at a time when we most urgently need to act. And countless studies and reports confirm that disinformation is flooding the digital and real-world landscapes of crisis contexts, shaping public opinion, inflaming tensions, and complicating the efforts of humanitarians. And you may be familiar with the common acronym MDH, misinformation, disinformation, and hate speech. All of these varieties of harmful information can hinder access to vital resources, interrupt relief efforts, and incite violence among former neighbors and friends. But today, in order to keep this conversation short and something just not going to extend through the night, I'd like you all to be able to leave the room before the sun goes down. For that reason, we're going to focus on disinformation specifically. And that's the deliberate creation of factually inaccurate information, which can then spread by people aware or unaware of its inaccuracies. The consequences of disinformation are hard to overstate. It incites violence, atrocities even. For example, with social media posts spurring the 2017 attacks against the Rohingya in Myanmar, which it's a campaign that the UN later characterized as having genocidal intent. In Gaza, we see campaigns manufacturing support for war crimes. And disinformation also undermines relief efforts and endangers aid workers. In Ukraine, for instance, a new wave of disinformation targeted at the Red Cross spread false claims about its activities, putting staff and volunteers on the ground at risk and limiting their ability to access people in need of aid. And this is happening as well in Sudan, of course. How are we doing, Alex, with the Slido? Slido is not happening. So I'll wrap up with my introduction real fast, just to say that last year at HNPW, there were dozens of panels on MDH, far fewer this year, I've noticed. And I wonder, are these questions being subsumed under technological debates? If it's true that there's two major trends in the evolution of the information space right now, and the first is the rise of AI technologies, generative AIs and LLMs, which make it much easier to both produce content and also potentially disseminate it. And the second major trend is the new ownership of some of the social media platforms, which has had very important repercussions on the information space, mostly due to the firing of the trust and safety teams, making sure that the environment is safe online. So now it's more difficult to monitor the content on those platforms. The other issue it evokes is that we must be mindful of the question of who considers what is true online and the issues with what is seen as potential censorship. It's a debate that is prominent in the US and growing traction everywhere. But we mustn't forget the political element of these dilemmas. Facts are always in danger from politics, as politics is not primarily concerned with truth, but with action. And beyond normal political practice looms organized lying, where the goal is not just to replace a part of the truth with a falsehood, but to go further to undermine the actual fabric of reality. So in less philosophical terms, in the words of former White House chief strategist under Trump, Steve Bannon, the goal is to flood the zone with shit. So how do humanitarians engage with this new political and psychological reality? How much should we be concerned with the political elements and the technological elements? So with that, I think we might want to hand over to the panel to have them properly introduce themselves and their work, and we'll start defining the scope of this enormous problem and hopefully still get out of this room when the sun is shining. So, Christina, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you for this really great introduction to a very, very complex problem. So you told me to introduce myself a little bit more. So maybe going back to how you sort of started talking about it, the link between real life violence affecting the aid sector and what is happening online. This is also how we as an organization came to the topic, because we worked on security incidents, and it was over time that we realized that there could be campaigns that drove people to using real life violence against aid operations. This was during the Ebola response in the DRC that we started to monitor this. And since then, we have tried to understand the topic a little bit better, but it is extremely complex. It is constantly evolving. It is different in every single country. So it's really quite a hard task. So maybe to sort of do as a bit more of an introduction, some 3 takeaways that we've found from looking at how the online space interacts with the humanitarian space and with aid security. So the first is that we've seen from looking at how aid agencies started to engage with the online space, that they first looked at it from a reputation management perspective. It was a question of how does my organization and name trend across social media. And I think that particular attitude that most aid agencies, for very obvious logical reasons, had to start looking at that topic, meant that the aid sector, in my view, kind of sleepwalked into the current situation. And in my view, the current situation is one where the concept of aid, the very idea of addressing needs of people through interventions is questions. And that, in my view, is one of the biggest, strongest disinformations that are out there. And they are also turned around to inciting violence against aid agencies. So I sort of leave it there, but just to give a sense of where we're coming from as an organization, it is very much about the link between aid security, the humanitarian space, and the digital environment.
It's a lot to think about. Thank you, Christina. Before we dig into some of those things that you said, let's hand off to maybe Maria, just so we can get an introduction to her work.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Nice, thank you. So my name is Maria Frey, and right now I serve as a member of the management board of Ukrainian public broadcaster Suspilne. But my career was started as a local reporter from Mariupol in 2014 when the Russian aggression started. So I have this experience to fight disinformation by my own eyes and my own hands with Mike as a local reporter. And during the full-scale invasion, I have to manage the whole team across the country to fight disinformation. I think that my experience could be interesting in two directions. One is about our practices in response of disinformation, and maybe some we can share also some practical cases that we saw and how disinformation could look like and how it could potentially affect the people and the organization as well. So this is my, I can say, experience and my professional field. So I will share this information with you, and I will talk about how we fight disinformation during the wartime.
I'm really looking forward to getting into those details with you, Maria. But for now, let's hand it off to Amal. You're muted.
How about now?
All good.
Great, thank you. Okay, hi everyone. So yeah, my name is Armel Fern. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Valent. So my background, originally I was a journalist. I was a Reuters foreign correspondent in the Middle East, and started my career in the era of the Iraq War. And then I started working at the BBC on investigative documentaries. And the focus sort of my career has been information flows and how that's changing because of the technical evolution that we've lived through. I spent, after leaving journalism, I spent about an equal amount of time in government as a senior advisor on looking at informational threats and how it was changing and what you should do about it. I spent some time working on Syria, where a lot of the factors that I saw, I had a close-up view of them coalescing into a particular type of methodology that I saw very close up when chemical weapons were used. And that interplay of using information and manipulating information to get a real world impact, particularly around policy, kind of it dawned on me that this was what I'd been looking at, and this was the ultimate culmination of it. I wrote a report for the Cabinet Office, I believe it was the first one on disinformation, looking at it from that perspective, and I was asked to then assess what tools were available for organizations in the UK and affiliated to the UK that they might be able to respond. And I realized at that point that there were no tools that could see inauthentic accounts and then see the methodologies that were used by those accounts. And so that's where I set up Valent. So what I'd say about our methodology from that sort of period of learning was that we are not fact checkers. We don't look at assessing information and saying whether or not it's true or false. What we look at is how the information is manipulated and distributed via manipulation around the information space using mostly technical means. And from there, we try and understand the methodologies that are used. So yes, there are bots. I think everybody knows that now, but they're used in very specific ways. And we try and understand that and provide solutions, not just give people more, because in the response space, everybody that we speak to, everyone we know complains about information overload. There's little benefit for people on the front lines to have a big 20-page report, although we write those. What they need are solutions. They need something practical. So that's what we focus on. We work with our information base was established in places like Sudan and Ethiopia, Iraq, Syria, 20 countries in all. And we found that those methodologies are used now in the States, in Western Europe, not only in politics, but in the commercial space. So it's a methodology that is applicable because ultimately it creates impact for the people who are doing it, and that's what they're after. So looking forward to getting into any aspect of that as the conversation goes forward.
Thanks, Amal. I'm really excited to have you here. I think far too often in the humanitarian world, we have very bubble-like conversations where we're talking to other humanitarians. So it's really valuable to have you as well as journalists and researchers in this humanitarian space with us today. And speaking of journalists, maybe I'll hand it off to Alasdair, who's at BBC Media Action.
Hi, everybody. Yes, I'm a senior advisor and senior researcher at BBC Media Action. I'm actually not a journalist. My background is in research. But yeah, as the name would suggest, BBC Media Action's BBC's international development charity. Historically, our focus has been around supporting public interest journalism and media organizations around the world, and also using media and communication to address a whole range of different development issues. As you can imagine, in the last kind of 5 years or so, becoming increasingly worried, concerned about the impact of mis and disinformation on all of that work. We developed an organizational strategy around tackling information disorder in 2021. And our focus on this work has really just increased over the last 5 years. We just launched a new strategy last year, and work to tackle distrust, division, and disinformation is really at the core of our organizational work now. In terms of the work that we do on this issue, we have a really strong focus on research to understand this problem in different contexts. That includes the kind of understanding of what's happening in the digital space, but I think uniquely to quite a lot of other organizations, also trying to understand the offline harms of disinformation and how it's impacting people and what's driving vulnerability amongst different audiences. And then we also do work on a whole range of different kind of intervention areas, from training, capacity strengthening with media partners in terms of the best approaches to tackling this through journalism, through media literacy, pre-bunking approaches, and also increasingly looking at kind of technological developments and how those can be applied to tackling this issue. I'd agree, certainly with the first speaker, this feels like a quite depressing time to be considering this issue with everything that's going on in the world. We ourselves were targets of disinformation from Elon Musk about 4 weeks ago. So it's a very prescient time to be having this discussion. Look forward to it.
Hopefully this kind of conversation can help us have a few ideas of how to move forward in the future and be slightly less depressed, but I hear you. It's not an easy time. Voila. The Sudanese context is maybe not going to help us lift our spirits, but I think it's really important that we hear from you and take advantage of your wealth of knowledge. So please introduce yourself and your work.
Thank you, Ayla. So my work mainly started as researching the impact of online gender-based violence on women who were holding who were holding political leadership positions during the transitional government in Sudan, and how they were being attacked, and also how other young women were being attacked online in a way to hold them from taking a political stance at that point, and also how online gender-based violence actually um, kind of prevent them from expressing themselves or continue their activism and political participation online. As part of that research as well, or as part of this work in general, we also developed kind of a program for young girls to develop their digital security skills in how to respond to online gender-based violence, and also to raise their awareness about it, because although they are sometimes are attacked with political disinformation, or they're being bullied or harassed, they still don't know how to counter this issue. And then just recently, I started working on this research on the impact of on the hate speech in Sudan as a driver of conflict and displacement, trying to analyze or kind of monitor the disseminator of hate speech, or the actors who disseminate hate speech across different timelines, and as well as coming or analyzing the root causes of hate speech in Sudan and how it's contributing to escalating the conflict on the ground, and also contributing the displacement at this point. Yeah.
Thanks, Wala. And Wala has a phenomenal paper led by the or produced by the Oxford refugee-led research program. I encourage you to look it up. She really outlines the problem very thoroughly there. But speaking of the problem, Christina has started to explain a little bit how we should be thinking about this in the humanitarian context. Let's get specific. Maybe Wala, we'll start with you. Can you explain how disinformation has redrawn battle lines in Sudan?
Yeah, sure. So the critical dynamic of the ongoing war currently in Sudan is the use of digital platform by both warring parties to manipulate the narratives, or the war narratives. And among their efforts of manipulating these narratives, they are also targeting journalists, destroying the telecom infrastructure, hindering actually news verifications, and documentation of human rights abuses on the ground. And even with the partial telecom service restoration in different geographical areas across Sudan, still there are significant other areas that are completely blacked out, and also exacerbated by the destruction of the electricity infrastructure. So the MDH in Sudan has actually evolved over time. Historically, it used to target ethnic groups, while today it also targets political and gender groups in Sudan, obstructing peace efforts and deepening ethnic divisions. So the digital space is kind of divided between the two parties now, supporting each of them. And also to give an example of how hate speech has been used to target ethnic groups during the civil war, for instance, in the civil war with South Sudan, the state media actually employed a daily 30-minute podcast to promote the war against the Southerners. And despite the signing of the Comprehensive Peace Agreement in 2005, divisive discourse was promoted to actually target the CPA signatories. And again, during the revolution as well, disinformation and smear campaigns were kind of directed towards the broad democracy groups, although these groups established themselves as credible source of information. This campaign have later undermined their online visibility and political stance, with shadow banning tactics employed by various actors during the transitional government. And also during this war, we also see that the online gender-based violence of sexualized nature is actually increasing and used as a weapon of war to exploiting existing social inequalities to target women, discredit them, and also isolate them from peace efforts. So that's kind of what's happening.
It's a little overwhelming, to be honest, Wala, the scale of the problem. But I'm wondering if you could also speak a little bit to the consequences for civilians in accessing aid, and also the consequences on local humanitarians, all of this disinformation and hate speech.
Yeah, sure. So there are hostile accusations actually targeted at humanitarian workers, sometimes affiliating them with one party, and another times calls for their explosions, undermining their safety and endangering both aid workers and the delivery of critical assistance. And due to the limited access of credible information, I see now the society is kind of polarized by warring parties. As I mentioned, there are supporters of each, which kind of contributed to breaking the social cohesion that has already exploited by previous civil wars. And as part of this, also different Sudanese who are forced to being displaced are now making their migration decisions based on their ethnic identity. So their roots and destinations are determined by how their group is perceived in the warring parties' territories, right? And ethnic hatred that fuels violence. Sometimes it dictates the dangers they also face at checkpoints of different warring parties.
Yeah, and the narratives are pretty shocking too, the ones that are surfacing and intelligible to us looking from the outside in. Like for example, truce, something along the lines of truce is treason. So the cleavages that are being formed based off of this disinformation is really apparent and impossible to ignore. Maria, I'm wondering if you can give us some more happy news about the impacts of disinformation in your context. Yeah, please go ahead.
I don't think that I will provide you with happy news, but I will definitely provide you with some practical situation that we had during the full-scale invasion from 2022 till now. I would like to say that disinformation has had devastating consequences in Russian ongoing war in Ukraine. I would like to remind you about the first days of a full-scale invasion. At that moment, Russian state media and Telegram channels spread false information that Ukrainian authorities left the country, and there is no actually Ukrainian government in Ukraine at all. For us, it was a challenge, but we as a journalist decided that this kind of disinformation is crucial for Ukrainian civilians. And we started to check and ask Ukrainian authorities to make simple photos on their working places. And we made it almost in every region. And especially in the capital of country. And I think that this actually help us to stop the spreading of the panic from across civilian people. I would like also mention another case where our role was not so huge as the previous one, and it was about the humanitarian corridors. Actually, the same situation when Russian sources falsely claimed that humanitarian corridors were safe, while in reality evacuation convoys were attacked. And it was on Zaporizhia region and Donetsk region. I know this not only from the news that we have to produce, but also from my relatives who tried to escape the war from Mariupol. And it was actually, maybe it was the most difficult situation for me because we hadn't a good connection with our people in Mariupol, and there was only one possible line to tell them the truth, and it was we use the radio to explain that there is no humanitarian corridors and it is not safe to go through them. We also saw the wave of disinformation about Ukrainian and international NGOs, especially in 2023 and 2024. It was mostly connected that all of the workers, they work with some extra help from very rich people, and that people, civilians, do not have to trust them as well. And also we see a huge amount of AI-generated fake news, especially after 2024. Maybe you remember even the deep fake videos and AI-generated propaganda. It actually, all of this made to make a disruption between the societies, between the different groups that we have in Ukraine. And it was also connected to the mobilization process, about the corruption as well. Such tactics Russian used to disrupt the trust between the civilians and also in official communication channels and Ukrainian officials as well. So this is just like a few examples how disinformation can influence. And maybe in my next turn, I can tell you how we as a media choose our behavior, how we respond to these attacks, because the amount of AI-generated content, especially right now on social media, is so huge that it's impossible to react us as journalists to every fake news that we see. But I think it could be a next turn of question and answers.
Yes, definitely. We're going to get to responses. I think that's the core of what we're trying to do today. So hang on to that thought. I just very quickly wanted to connect your point about the disinformation about Ukrainian international NGOs with maybe Christina's experiences and how that might be in line with what you've seen in your line of work too.
Thank you. So we've looked a lot at the situation in the Sahel, and there are clearly some similarities, but there are also some quite distinct contexts. So one thing we noticed in the Sahel is that there are a lot of attempts to put false information. Aid agencies are spies. Aid agencies are here to be our colonizers. Aid agencies are here to take our resources. And they're increasingly put out on X, but they get relatively little engagement, so people don't do very much with it. Where we see the biggest level of disinformation really sort of spreading across society is usually when there was some kind of tragic security incident, and that's then discussed on social media, and we're seeing it in the comments. So it's not people putting out their original content that is disinformation. It is by inserting themselves into the conversation about something else that is being discussed, where we're sort of seeing it. So to give you two very specific examples, in February 23, a horrific ambush on an MSF convoy that killed 2 staff. MSF put out a press release stating they're here to provide neutral, independent healthcare, and they're ready to talk to all parties in conflict. And it was around these statements that discussions then emerged, saying what you're in contact with these rebel forces, these terrorists, and that then became this conversation saying, well, then you deserve to be killed. And then fast forward July 24, the MSF office is attacked, and An medical machine is taken away, and that's circulating on social media afterwards, how the rebel forces are using this. And then again, the conversation is all about, oh, MSF is here to support terrorists by even giving them medical supplies. A few months later, a driver is shot and it's circulated on social media. Well, we've taken out one of the supporters of the terrorists. So that's something where we are seeing a direct connection between the conversations on social media and the murder of aid agencies, but we're not seeing it as part of being effective as original content being put out there, but through very clever conversations around topics. And then that's the final point. What makes it so hard is to know who's doing this. Is this people who actually think this? Do they just don't know the humanitarian principles? Or are these people who are there, sitting there waiting for these conversations, going in there deliberately attacking the humanitarian space? Or did they do that in the past? And by now this sort of attitude has sunk through and that's what people actually think. And it becomes very difficult to know what is what. And then the very final point there, what is also really difficult is it is always linked to accusations of colonialism, of racism. And then it also becomes extremely difficult to turn around and call something as disinformation or something, because there's always an element of truth in something that's being said there. And so there are some genuine concerns, issues that are always underlying this, and that makes it extremely difficult to know how to respond well to this increasing climate that questions why aid is beneficial.
Well, Christina, that's a lot to take in. You've really done well in underlining some of the challenges that we have in defining this problem. And what do we even call it? Because disinformation, I think, is an easier target for us as humanitarians to try to identify and try to respond to. But you're right that sometimes those lines are blurred. Often it's really difficult to even identify if it's factually untrue, and the spreader, the original creator of the information, knows that it's factually untrue, much less the people who actually spread that information. But something that was said makes me want to bring Amal into this conversation about which narratives stick. You were saying that things on X weren't being picked up as much. So I'm wondering if we could talk about, what do we do about it? How do we respond to this? We know the problem is bad. Potentially it's getting worse. So Amal, how do you respond to different types of narratives and of different levels of or different degrees of success in how they're picked up and spread around?
So I'd say there's two ways of tackling that question. There's on the tactical level and the strategic level. And on the tactical level, we work on that quite a lot with technology and methodologies. But on the strategic level is actually probably where it's trickier. So I would say, first, we have to, often as people working in hostile environments that are in places that we are not from, where we are culturally outsiders, we have to take a different frame when we assess who these actors are and how they might be operating. So what I mean by that is something that's universally true is that the actors are looking for impact. They're looking for some kind of real world outcome that they want. And that might be to defeat one party over another. It might be to earn money, it might be to have criminal activity. What they claim, the facts, are kind of just a means to an end. And we often focus on, is it true? Let's say what the truth is. And we generally, as a company, stay away from talking about truth, and we don't actually talk about disinformation. We talk about manipulation. So we don't get into this, what is purposefully inaccurate and what is, not purposefully inaccurate. What matters from our perspective is efforts to manipulate. And if you talk about efforts to manipulate, then you have to start thinking about what the reason for manipulation is. And OSINT can do a very good job of pinpointing exactly who these people are to degrees of quite a lot of accuracy. But even if we don't even get into that, we can often tell by their talking points who they're 70% likely to be. And so in Sudan, we can look at unattributed pages and see that their talking points track very closely to the RSF or to the military or a different actor. And you might not be able to write a Guardian or Reuters article saying this is definitely who those people are. But in terms of us as actors, if we have a 70% suspicion that they are those actors and we can take remedial measures, then that's enough. You know, then you can still save lives and you can still save, safeguard your own organization. So I would say, one, we have to get over this idea that somebody's just mistaken and there's just a fact, and we can counter that fact with another fact, and that they are in essence good faith actors. They are for the most part not. The people who are organizing it are not good faith actors. They're actors involved in conflict who want a certain outcome. And organizations, particularly aid organizations and journalistic organizations, and in fact foreign missions, will often just be collateral damage. It's not necessarily that they specifically want to target MSF, let's say. It's that MSF is an easy cipher for Western influence, which is a very handy narrative to attack your ultimately to get whatever aim that it is that you want out of it. So I would say we have to start looking at it from those perspectives, and if we can look at it from those perspectives, we can also bring in, there's another perspective which is looking at it in a holistic way. It's not just messaging and, you know, if somebody says something and you say something else. It's the confluence of real world and the information space in a holistic environment. So riffing off from the example that Christina gave on Sudan, I can give another one. So we were doing monitoring for the civilian government, and we could see that when we were monitoring unattributed pages in Sudan, we could see a pattern evolving, and that these actors, you know, keeping in mind that they're malign actors and they're not good faith actors. Let's say they have a particular aim in mind. We could see that they're what we thought were their unattributed pages, so pages they didn't say were military or RSF or whatever, were following a certain methodology where they would test certain narratives. One of those was accusing the specific individuals within the civilian government of corruption, or within the sort of pro-democracy movement. If they didn't see those people in a 2-week period, if they didn't see that messaging get traction, then they would automatically go to kangaroo trials, so fake trials on corruption charges. And we could see that happening multiple times over and over again, to the point where we could say to the government, this person is likely to be arrested on trumped up charges and be put on a public kangaroo trial sort of scenario. And that's not because we had any really special way of doing it. It's just that we looked at their methodology, we could look at the patterns, and then we could say, okay, this is what's likely to happen. Equally, we could do that when demonstrations happened, when both sides were trying to mobilize, use information to mobilize a protest, and we could see that, talking about methodologies again, that they wouldn't get that many people organically interested in it, but they were provoking the civilian authorities to put the military out there, and that would result in conflict, potentially the military firing on civilians, and then that would create a new cycle of itself. So you could see these things happening. This is bad actors using the information environment in a kind of concerted and holistic way to get whatever it is that they want. And whether or not civilians die, whether or not a Western organization is maligned in that process, is neither here or there. If it serves their purposes, they'll malign it, or they won't, or they'll support it, but it doesn't matter. It's the impact that they want at the end of the day that matters. So those would be my key points on that issue.
Thanks, Amal. I'm wondering, Alistair, the types of actors that Amal is describing, how much does the BBC Media Actions approach take into account those types of figures? And a follow-up question too, you mentioned that your strategy has changed from the 2021 strategy. What changed, and why did you have to adapt it?
So Yeah, I kind of agree with everything Emma was saying, but I guess in the context of our work, I think our strategy has moved from being reactive to trying to be more proactive about how you build individual and societal resilience to these issues. And it kind of links back to that, both the definitional challenge of how do you define disinformation, but then also this point about where it's coming from. We do a lot of research to understand those patterns of who the actors are, what their tactics are, those networks, but increasingly our focus is on understanding what impact that's having on audiences, and also doing research to understand the particular vulnerabilities that different segments of audiences in any particular context may have. And then thinking about that in terms of how you're designing your media and communication interventions to address that. And that's led us kind of increasingly to be thinking about how you do more proactive work around pre-bunking. So thinking about the types of manipulation that we know are common in disinformation narratives, doing that research to understand what manipulation techniques are being used in any particular context, also understanding what types of narratives are prevalent, and then using that to inform the type of pre-bunking work that we're doing. If anyone's not familiar with pre-bunking, that's really a methodology to warn people about the types of manipulation or the types of disinformation narratives that they're likely to be exposed to, and building their ability to spot and be more resilient to them. So I think that's also in terms of why we shifted. I think just seeing the increasing scale of this problem, and that's only going in one direction. So I think obviously there was a lot of focus on fact-checking approaches. I still think there's a place for that. There's obviously been a decimation of fact-checking on the social media platforms recently, but I think with the way that AI is going to affect this, we need to be more proactive. And certainly in terms of the humanitarian sector and humanitarian organizations, I would also encourage them to think about how can we predict what we know or what we think is likely to happen in terms of disinformation narratives and campaigns that might be affecting our work or affecting us as organizations, and how can we try to be proactive in terms of how we're addressing that before it happens.
Yeah, thanks for pointing out that really important distinction between proactive responses and reactive responses, which brings me to the question that maybe I'll start asking you, Maria. When is it worth responding? Ideally, we do have this great, healthy, robust information environment because we've invested a lot in proactive approaches, and we have this robust local medias. There's no information vacuums. But when we don't have that, the privilege of that space, how do we react to disinformation?
It's a good question. We have this conversation with my editor-in-chief almost every week when we plan our news production. And I encourage her to share her experience in this understanding. She has a very strong understanding that we have to explain not everything to our audience, but not all the opinions, not all of the words that spread through the internet. Maybe you know that previous period of Trump, our researchers, they count that every day we produce 17 lies. So, and we choose that we need to explain only something that could become a decision, that could influence and that could possibly change the work, the structures, the way how government and humanitarian organization work. So the first thing we actually try to understand, is this just words to make some likes in social media, or it could be something that could potentially become a decision change for the huge amount of people. And this is something that we try to remember all of the time. But also in this way, we have to remember who should respond to disinformation. It's not only the role of media, but also this is a role of public people and authorities as well. Sometimes it's crucial for journalists to say the truth, but sometimes it is crucial to share the official position from the government, for example, and or a humanitarian organization. And the last thing that I would like to mention here is to how to respond. Yeah, some information we can put on digital platforms, TV, radio as well. But sometimes it is better to have some close community where we can meet and where we can discuss everything that is going on. This is actually the extra function that we have right now in regional media, because we try to connect people between them and try to make something like a community that will be able to become an advocacy of truthful information if something happened in the region. So we do not only produce the content for different platforms. We also try to produce connection between real people offline. This is a new way of communication for us right now, but we understand that it is crucial because sometimes you can't get your audience through all of the digital platforms because of the algorithms. And the best thing is just to come to your people in real life. So we try to organize something like a meeting where we can discuss everything that is going on, and to make this real network of people who trust our news and who also in the future in dangerous situation will share our news as well. But I'm not so optimistic in this way. I know that we put a lot of efforts, and as a journalist, I do not like any words that connected with regulation of frameworks. But I think that in this situation, there should be something like a regulatory frameworks for big tech companies for spreading false information. And this is something that is crucial right now, because we can't check everything, we can't do all the work, and we ask right now, even with our media organization, we try to connect with other media organization and develop something like a policy paper for the international tech companies, like a recommendation how to work in our context. But I think that the biggest question right now is for policymakers to develop a good regulatory framework that will protect the freedom of speech and that will actually protect the truth information in the world. Yeah.
This is why I'm so pleased with this panel that we have already 3 vastly different responses to how to respond, looking at pre-bunking or creating a healthy information environment in the first place, another about large-scale monitoring of different narratives, and Maria, the idea of having people connect in real space as a response to online disinformation, I think is fascinating. But you bring up the point of techplomacy, and I'm in this moment at HNPW, I'm seeing incredibly deep cynicism both in governments and this turn to authoritarianism and kleptocracy, and in private companies. And of course, the lines between them are blurring. So what do we do if we can't count on well-intentioned individuals nestled within tech platform management? What other responses do we have? What other advocacy avenues do we have? And this is a question to everyone, although I am eager to hear from Walla, especially since we haven't heard about responses in Sudan yet. So maybe I'll hand it to you, Walla, first, and then we'll open it up to everyone else.
Thanks, Ayla. Actually, I can't agree more with what's have been said already before. But responding to MDH, particularly in Sudan, is quite challenging. And at the same time, of course, we need kind of a multifaceted approach from various actors, including local, but also the INGOs. So mainly there is only one fact-checking organization that's active now, Beam Reports, which kind of validate the various disinformation disseminated online. However, this one organization is not enough. We need more work to actually towards fact-checking the various information that's available online, particularly in areas that still remained disconnected from the internet. And also, as already mentioned, of course, to empower users, online users with media and digital skills in order for them not only to depend on these fact-checking organizations, but also to use their own skills to debunk what they see online. However, there are also another challenges with the cybercrime law itself that actually initially intending to combat hate speech and fake news. However, it's used by the state as a weapon to suppress dissent, particularly activists and journalists who challenge the state's narrative. So the question here is how to ensure actually the legal instruments are also effective, and how to ensure the technology advancements are followed by legal frameworks that are actually credible and that we can depend on to ensure credible information and also like inclusive and safe digital environment.
Thanks, Swala. I think you bring up a really good point about the disinformation trap, when authoritarians can use disinformation as an excuse to shut down these vital communication spaces. And I'll plug CDAC, that we believe that information is a lifeline for communities in crises, that this is one of the most essential things that people need access to. So really making sure that this cause is not used as an excuse to block people from getting life-saving information, and also for participating in a robust civil society too. A lot of the best intentioned people sometimes advocate for the closure of platforms that are lifelines for people in crisis, whether it's X or TikTok. So making sure that we keep that nuance, and making sure that in advocating for tech companies to be responsible and to own up to their, and to be accountable, that we don't also inadvertently advocate for the closure of these vital spaces. Christina, talking about the different types of responses, and when a response can actually be subverted to hurt people in crises. I'm wondering, when should we not respond to disinformation or harmful information? Or are there any cases when humanitarians should let something go and not respond directly to it?
That's extremely difficult to know, because you only know when it's gone wrong, that you probably shouldn't have responded. And I think what Amal said about understanding the wider space is probably crucial. And I think that's where the skills would need to be developed, to think much broader, to know when it may go wrong. So one concrete example, there was a evacuation of humanitarian activities from a town in Burkina Faso, and there was then some disinformation spreading on private WhatsApp groups, saying the reason the aid agencies had evacuated was because they were again in line with the rebel forces. Now, the aid agencies accused of this decided to go public. They published a press release and worked with local media, stating there is this false information circulating. This is not true. We did this as a security risk management strategy. But then the comments on Facebook came in, and in my view, it just went wrong, this strategy, because it just became this massive conversation around, with all these comments saying, well, why are you putting out this press release? This is just proof that this is not true, etc., etc. So I think if you would know why actors had been putting this information out in the first place, then you would know when not to respond. And we're also sort of looking at cases where maybe there was some pre-debunking, where something went well, in the sense that there are only positive reactions on social media. And so far, again, this is only from the Sahel, but so far the only sort of two elements we've seen is a local organization talking to their grassroots communities about the good work they're doing. We don't really see any disinformation, any nasty comments happening in response to that. And then one element where we also seen largely positive comments was when one UN agency had sponsored some local influencers to go to the United Nations General Assembly, and these well-known figures were showing their pictures and tweeting and everything of what they were doing there. And that also created a lot of positive space. So there seems to be possibilities for pre-debunking, but the key thing I think is aid agencies need to really understand the global communication space, and I think this is where I see a huge gap. And certainly I don't believe there's enough connection between programs and security risk management and communication to develop good strategies. They're both in response, but also in this pre-debunking.
This makes me think of how you've addressed perfectly Maria's point about we need to also think about who should respond, not just how to respond or when to respond. I'm also thinking about Alistair's point about trust, how you said that this is a key element of your new response, that we need to have a more holistic view of how to respond to disinformation rather than playing digital whack-a-mole and trying to target one specific narrative at a time. So I'm wondering what else besides skills that need to be developed to know when a response to disinformation can go wrong, what else do we need to develop? What do we need and from whom in order to have a more coherent response, not only in humanitarian contexts, but anywhere where people are fighting for sort of the uplifting of truthful messages, of promoting civil society, that kind of thing. So again, what do we need and from whom? Maybe I'll throw that one to you, Amel.
Thanks very much. Yeah, good question. So what do we need and from who? And thinking back to Christina's point about response, let's start with knowledge. So a knowledge of methodologies. So there's a researcher called Ben Nemo, who's very well known in the disinformation space, and he coined a couple of really very useful metrics and frameworks that we use, and I hope others in the space use as well, because they're very, very useful. One of them is the breakout scale. So how do you rate disinformation? When is a disinformation campaign, or let's say manipulation, when is it successful? And if you know the methodology, as Ben obviously does, then you see the logic in it. So if a campaign is just floating around a bunch of bots, a little collection of bots, a network of bots, and it could be, hundreds of them, that's frequent and it's got a lot of volume, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's having any impact whatsoever. And then it breaks out from one to another, from one bunch of a network of accounts that maybe are run by one political party. Let's say, for example, it's a mainstream right-wing party in a sort of anonymized context, and that would rate as 0 or 1, let's say, and then it goes to organically a hard right party that it's moving across, but within the same world, and then finally it ends up in mainstream media. So Ben Nemo would say that is when it's become successful, and that is when you need to deal with it, because now it's having a real world impact and it's being organically shared. So it's useful to start thinking of things in that way, and if you start thinking of things in that way, then you start having an idea of when to respond or not. So one of the things that we do is through a software means that you can see if it's just bots promoting a certain narrative, and then you straight away know that there's no point responding. And that point about response is really important, because we go from means and understanding to methodology. Disinformation or manipulation methodologies use a lot of the same techniques that have been around for a really long time, since the KGB used to do this stuff, and others, they're not alone, where you make a claim and you provoke the target to make a response, and then you focus on the response, and the story moves on. In old journalistic terminology, we used to call it just the story's developing legs, and you've given it the legs by responding to it. So if it was just in the world of bots and it was a 0-1 on Ben's scale, then by responding to it, by panicking, because in that sense you are the target, you know, the target is you, they're trying to get you to say something, you say something, and then the story moves on and you've moved the story on. And if you think about, you know, many examples we've probably come across in the last year or two, you can probably, if you just think about it, you know, identify several times when that's happened, where the original story just really wasn't that popular, and then suddenly it became popular because of the reaction to it. So I would say that's the first. And back on the knowledge issue, I would say if you've done a mapping of the information environment, which is very possible, lots of organizations do it, we do it, and you know who the influencers are, but you also understand the political economy of the place, you will probably notice that there are influencers, quote unquote, especially in war zones, especially in places where there's conflict and economic issues, where it's part of the political economy to create an audience and then rent out your audience, or rent out you as the access to the audience. And in Sudan, we definitely saw that. We've seen it elsewhere. We've seen it in Ethiopia. I'm definite it's happening in the UK, in the US, and elsewhere. So it's not in any way unique to particular geographies. And when that is the case, and in Sudan, actually, we ended up speaking to people who were in that scenario and had could tell us that they had been approached by shady people of all sort of different political persuasions and been told to say certain things, or been given talking points, which they then reflected online. Now, in that, I've thought to myself, if I was in that scenario, and again, those people didn't have any particular political persuasion one way or the other, they needed money, and this is something that they could do, then it would be equally easy as cash for work schemes work. If there's another way of earning money that it doesn't involve having to generate an audience and then say provocative things to create this destabilization, that's probably money well spent, even if it just involves, you know, building infrastructure that's completely unrelated to communications, for example. It just takes away a disincentive. So I think it starts with understanding how the methodologies work, understanding the landscape, and that within itself can provide alternative solutions.
Great, Amal. I wish we could keep talking for hours, but we are running very quickly out of time. I want to give the floor back to you all if you have any last words, but please make it really brief so that we have time for questions and answers. So if anyone has just one last thing that they want to add that's occurred to them as we've been speaking.
Could I just come in, building on everything various speakers have said, but I completely agree about the need for the sector to get much better at monitoring and understanding this problem, but also would really stress the importance of understanding that in particular context. And that links to my second point, really, which is I'd really stress the need for the humanitarian sector not to look at this as an issue that it needs to address itself in silo. There are many other organizations, sectors working on this already. Some of them have been thinking and working on this probably more in recent years, and I don't think anybody has completely cracked how to approach it, but there's lots of work happening already, which I think could link in better with the humanitarian sector, and really thinking about what coalitions of actors working on this issue looks like at a local level. And that's going to be very different in Ukraine, South Sudan, Libya, wherever. And as many people have said, I don't think there's like one or two approaches to this which are better than others. It needs a whole range of approaches, but thinking about who are the different organizations at that local context that can help with that, but coming together with more of a kind of strategic plan about how to deal with this in any context.
Absolutely. Humanitarians are not going to solve this by ourselves. Partnerships are critical. I know that working on this issue for the last year or so, the media development organizations that are part of our network are the ones that have been really at the cutting edge compared to the rest of us who are just starting to wake up to the repercussions of these issues. So with that, I'd like to open up to questions from people online or in person. Don't be shy. All right, Sasha, go ahead.
Yeah, Ila, frankly, I took this last remark as an invitation to speak. Thanks so much. Just a quick couple of points. Yes, disinformation is a complex and multi-layered issue, so it requires not a single reactive action, but multi-layered, holistic, and preventive approach to it, and that makes it complex. And that's even more preventive than pre-banking mentioned by Alistair. And here I would like to make the case for, what's so-called media development, so the promotion of independent and professional local journalism, and humanitarian actors need them too. And that's quite different from PR and Stratcom, where most of the international actors' investment flows in, including humanitarian actors' investment. And there is a community here to help you guys. BBC Media Action, Fondation Hirondelle, and others, as that has said by Ila, have years of expertise in building those capacities locally. Christina alluded to it. Proximity is key for trust, so you need local professional media to help you provide reliable information trusted by local population. In this era of budget cuts, we cannot afford duplication of efforts. We need to join force, including in monitoring of disinformation analysis, including in lobbying big tech actors, where the responsibility and resources lies. We all know there is a lack of genuine will to take those issues seriously there. And so we need to document those cases, those links between hate speech, disinformation online, and actual violence on the ground. And at some point, I guess we need to liaise with actors specialized in strategic litigation to hold those actors accountable. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Sasha. And if we don't have any other questions, then I might pose a last one to our panelists that we've got plenty of other questions. All right. Good thing you all had time to think. Would you raise your hands again, please? Okay, maybe I'll start with you in the front.
I hope you can hear me well enough. I'm actually from a Ukrainian organization, and I had a question in the sense of, we all know that disinformation and propaganda has its own very unique structure, but it is structured and it's usually backed up by multiple actors. How do you see, with the new developments in the media, how do you see the structure that the response or the preemptive measures have to take in terms of all the multi-layered holistic approach that we have? Like, what is the structure shall be, and who should be at the core of it? Yeah, thank you.
I think anyone on this panel is equipped to answer that, at least partially. So yeah, we'll take multiple questions. All right. I think I saw the gentleman in the vest and you in the blue shirt. So maybe we'll start with you, sir.
Say that people may fight for the freedom to speech, but they very quickly give up their freedom to listen. And gravitate into echo chambers, gravitate into information streams that give the narrative they like. And very often the manipulation is happening very heavily in one of those information streams. And so it's often not a question of attacking one manipulation, but a whole information stream that is in itself manipulated. How is that? How much impact can you make in those situations?
Thank you. And maybe I'll move to you in the blue at the very back.
Hey, yeah, thanks. This has been really great, and I really appreciate the way you've set up the panel with this like absolutely brilliant context-specific knowledge, along with colleagues who are kind of working more at the global level. So thanks so much. I work for CARE International, and I coordinate our communications on humanitarian crisis. And I was going to flag So thank you, Alistair, because I was going to flag, we've got no capacity to do this. So I'm really glad that you said, and Tasha, like this exists everywhere because we had no capacity, and then now we've got even less capacity. So in the last couple of months, and it's on me to find out what already exists. So I'll be very much getting in touch. I guess I wanted to sort of build on my colleague from Ukraine's question. It was sort of what's the process, what's the structure to make this happen? Because what I'm sort of taking away is, and it's so powerful to hear Wala and Maria speak about, and Christine speak about this trust at the local level and the investment in local journalism. Like, we can't fight Elon Musk on X. We can't. Like, so should we be doing more as international organizations and the UN, like investing in these local level trust building initiatives? Is that where we should be putting more of our kind of energy when it comes to this space, thinking about media literacy and pre-bunking and better strategies? So I guess that's my question. Thank you so much.
Oof, that's a big one. Anyone else in the audience? Yeah, go ahead.
So it's less a question, but more a worry, which we have seen a shift from attacks against organization to attacks against individuals. We saw in the past that some of the leaders of these different humanitarian organizations have been attacked. I don't know how many people have attacked the UN Secretary General and others, but now it goes to a level which is really the local workers, not only the foreigners or the so-called expats, but I think there is also a dimension that we need to take into account and equip ourselves as humanitarian organization on protecting our own staff, and this duty of care and dimension which relates not only to the physical one, but the mental dimension. So it's not really a question, sorry, but another dimension which maybe is for next year.
Thanks, Philippe. Yeah, we were trying to keep the scope of this conversation limited, but it blew up as disinformation does. So we have lots of questions. Who wants to take a stab at any or all of them?
I could have a go at a bit of it.
Go ahead.
So I hear the issue of resources. The person who's tweeting from CARE touched on this, and I think it's probably something that's in a lot of people's minds. But I'd like to challenge that as well. So there is a country that is fomenting sectarianism and violence, and particularly violence against humanitarian actors in Iraq, and they essentially own pretty much the information space in Iraq. So using the kind of methodologies that I've mentioned, and they spend £12 million a year to do that. And they're able to do that with that kind of money. Now, if you think of, if you look at it from the point of view of malign actors, they actually see themselves as the insurgents. They see themselves as struggling against a behemoth Western information ecosystem that includes the likes of the BBC and CNN, which completely own the information space. And if you're on the hard right, somebody mentioned Elon Musk, then they see John Stewart or John Oliver, who can make things, sort of totally trend in the mainstream, just from one sort of comment. So the methodologies that they've developed are based on using like all good insurgent sort of military type operations. This is kind of the information version of asymmetric warfare, flipping on their head the idea that they don't have enough resources and these other guys have these big sort of resource engines and these big like sort of monster capabilities, and that they have to think of a way of getting around that. And they do that at relatively small spend. So the question is, if you think about various Western government spend in Iraq, how many times over 12 million is that if you put that all together? Like quite a lot. So what we're really talking about is how the money is spent, and that relates to how we see the dynamics of the information space. So I'd leave it at that.
Just to build on that, I think we've seen certainly a lot of thinking and work and attempts to better coordinate around this issue in relation to elections in the last 2 or 3 years, and the UNDP has certainly had a role in bringing together coalitions of actors on that. I would completely agree, and links back to Sasha's point about the importance of this being owned at a local level. But I think there are roles for organizations such as the UN to support that kind of coordination, but it needs that range of stakeholders at a local level coming together to think about how to respond to that, and then also coordination amongst donors in terms of how they're funding that and making sure there's not duplication.
Thanks, Alistair. So I'm hearing a common theme of coordination being our general recommendation, better coordination, better partnerships. I'm wondering if anyone else wants to come in. Christina, if you have any burning thoughts.
I feel really bad coming out with the thought that is really going through my head, triggered by your question here, because I feel I don't want to end on such a negative sentiment, but I'm saying it now anyway, because I think it is a real concern of how much danger there is for individuals out there. And just to throw in one particular example where we are actually really very concerned at the moment is in Niger. And there have been influencers who have been saying debanking stuff on social media, and one of them is now physically in prison. And that's something that does actually trouble me a lot. And I really hope someone else is going to say something else, because I don't want to end on something as depressing as this, but the real life danger, unfortunately, is there.
I see another question in the back. Go ahead.
Yeah, actually, it's not on the countries, the focus, but let's say on the post-truth era, or the second post-truth era we're living in. So right now the cuts are mainly derivative of a survey done by Brookings Institute in 2019, where the perception is around that 25% of the US GDP is dedicated to aid, while it's well under the 0.7%. How do you tackle that kind of disinformation in your world?
Different layers of disinformation existing in different strata. Another big question. Anyone want to tackle that one? Crickets.
I can have a go.
Go for it.
So that question relates to the simple fact that people will be unaware of basic facts. So I think Christina mentioned, or Ilya might have been you, about Steve Bannon's point about flood the zone with shit. I was reading an article the other day related to this stuff on Signal, and it was from 2019, I think, or 2020. And it was talking about all the people in around the first Trump administration and what they'd said about Donald Trump. And it reminded me of all the facts that are out there about that particular individual. And the point being that there's a lot of facts that we just forget. And the bad actors will take one distorted or completely wrong fact and push it and push it and push it by this infrastructure that they have, till we can't avoid but have it imprinted on our minds whether or not we agree with it or not. So the focus of having lots and lots of facts which are extremely accurate but are just lost in the space is, I think, part of the issue here that we have to think about. And I think my theme in this conversation has been about, rethinking how we look at this. So I'll roll with it and push it even further and say we also need to look at how we how the tactics and methodologies of getting basic information out there. Is volume of facts really better than one fact that is repeated until people finally get it? And if you've ever worked on a political campaign for any sort of political party, any mainstream political party, they'll tell you that it's just simple facts over and over and over and over again, because our attention span as individuals is fragmented and our information environment is fragmented, and malign actors understand that and use that to their advantage. So just having more of the right facts is not helping us.
That old quote from Hannah Arendt, factual truths are rarely compellingly true, is I think, addressing what you're saying, Amal. I see we've got one more question in the back, and I'll also tag on a question that's occurred to me while we've been doing this Q&A. And so you can, hopefully someone can address both of our questions. Maybe it's a bit flippant to ask, but what gives you hope in the face of all of these complicated and diverse challenges? What gives you hope? And with that, I'll also pass on to the last final question. Please go ahead.
Thanks. It's not really a question. I just wanted to respond. I appreciate the challenge, Amal, on the resourcing piece. Like comms in NGOs is funded through restricted like programs. We don't get, you know, special standalone money for comms, but I take your point. And I guess I wanted to just reflect on what, like, going back to, again, what I was sort of, I'm hoping to kind of take away from this and think about more is like this, how we can use what restricted and increasingly shrinking resources we have got to absolutely tackle this core duty of care issue that we have for our staff and safety by tapping into this obviously extraordinary amount of knowledge that exists at the local level through professionals like Wala and Maria and the many, many, many others that exist in all of these contexts and who you spoke to in your report, Christina, and you know, and then bringing to bear the knowledge of like the likes of Amal and Alistair and CDAC and the bigger kind of global, you know, specialist organizations. We can bring that link perhaps. So I don't know if it's hope, but I'm trying to be solution focused in this absolutely crazy time. But I'd see NGOs and UN agencies doing less of the rolling out Angelina Jolie to what the cash for work example that Amal gave. We do that too. We just don't give them cash. We give them kudos. But we also pay influencers in kudos to go promote our stuff. It's not working anymore. Like, so we need to do something else.
Any creative ideas from our panelists on what else to do? And hope.
I have very quickly managed to think of 3 areas of hope if I'm putting on my rose-tinted spectacles. One is on this issue of safety and kind of, you know, how do people doing debunking work communicate that? AI does give us opportunities to do that work without using real people on the ground and to do that in a way that's actually now compelling and engaging to audiences. So I think that's potentially an avenue to look at. A second area is, I think there's lots of concern, worry about how LLMs might affect many issues, but there is also recent research showing that LLMs can actually help to deal with the issue of echo chambers and can actually be quite helpful in terms of getting people to speak across divides. And I think that's an area of hope. And then my last one, I think we're at a time where people are thinking about their information environment a lot. It's obviously, there are a lot of concerns about that, but it's also potentially a moment to be engaging people in society about discussions about what they want from their information environment, helping them to become more aware of it and thinking through the enormous fundamental shifts that are about to happen to that. That is happening now. We can be involved in that, and it's a moment where people are potentially more willing to engage in those discussions, I think.
And you've built a beautiful segue for me, Alistair, to plug CDAC Network's upcoming Community of Practice call. It's going to be at the end of April, and we're going to talk about the impact of the U.S. administration shifts. That's really our mode of operation, is partnerships and having these kinds of engaging discussions where we talk about how to build solutions together. So please, if you're a CDAC Network member, please join us at that call. Thank you, everyone, for coming here and sharing your diverse experiences. I know it seems like we have a huge mountain to climb, and it's not very clear what the future looks like with these shifting technologies and political arenas. But I'm really grateful to have this conversation, to be really creative and talk about these different types of solutions, whether it's in-person meeting on the ground in Ukraine, or having advanced technological solutions looking at the nature and origin of different narratives online. So thank you all very much. Really appreciate it. And again, please come to more discussions like this. That's what we do here at CDAC.
Thank you.